This is such a special pleasure to have Paul Stamets rejoin us for the 2020 maiden voyage of the Bioneers virtual conference. Paul first spoke at Bioneers in 1996 when he was unknown. He showed up with this wild proposition that mushrooms can save the world, and he turned out to be right. It was clear from the outset that he's the rare genius and visionary citizen scientist who can actually manifest his vision in the most practical terms. Since that time, Paul has earned richly deserved major awards and worldwide recognition, including the prestigious selection as a National Geographic Explorer. He's the central protagonist in the recent hit film that originated here at Bioneers, Fantastic Fungi, by Bioneer Louis Schwartzberg. We'll show a short clip during the break after this keynote segment. Paul has built a great company, written foundational books on mycelia, and sparked a global mycelial awakening. His astonishing inventions in mycotechnologies are addressing some of the world's most urgent global ecological and health crises, from remediating toxic sites and farmlands, to preventing bee colony collapse disorder, to supporting our immune systems in these dangerous times. Today, Paul will address the deepest underlying crisis of all, the crisis that resides between our ears. It's a crisis of consciousness that's precipitating the widespread awakening that we are a part of nature, not apart from it. So please join us in welcoming our beloved friend, colleague, and mycelial ambassador, Paul Stamets, live from British Columbia.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, folks. I have been on this planet now for 65 years. My first interest in mushrooms was finding psilocybin mushrooms, and indeed, I wrote my first book when I was 23. I just pulled it out, dusted it off. Psilocybe mushrooms and their allies. It contains the genus Psilocybe contains the majority of the psilocybin mushrooms. There's around 216 species in the genus Psilocybe. 116 species are psilocybin active, which means they contain the tryptamine compounds psilocybin and psilocin, and some other interesting analogs that I'll speak about. So, it's been an interesting course in my life because I was originally, my interest in this subject, when I went to conferences, I was treated like a leper. People avoided me. They felt uncomfortable with the subject. And my times have really changed. So I would like to, first, I have a slide deck that'll be available to all of you. But I'm going to first really show you how much those times have changed. And what I want to show is 3 slides showing the universities that are currently engaged in research on psychedelics and more specifically on psilocybin mushrooms. So if we have that first slide up, that'd be great. These are the institutions currently doing research on psychedelics. The next slide shows the institutions specifically doing research on psilocybin mushrooms. Now, this is extraordinary to think that these institutions were approved by the FDA and the DEA. The FDA is over the DEA for clinical trials because they satisfied several important criteria. 1, unlikely to do any harm. 2, being able to address a critical medical need that's not currently being addressed by conventional medicine. And 3, is it scalable? Can it be brought in as a medicine at an affordable price? So indeed, these benchmarks have been met. There's now up to 40 institutions that are currently doing clinical studies on psilocybin. And even in Europe, I think there's around, next slide if we could, we have about 20 institutions in Europe also. So this is a global movement. What's astonishing about this is the chorus of conclusions all steer towards the same endpoints. That these are some of the most powerful psychoactive and psychiatric medicines ever been discovered by medicine. But indigenous peoples, and we all are indigenous to this planet, but indigenous peoples in Greece, in Spain, in North Africa, in South America, Central America, Mesoamerica, North America, had long ago discovered that these were sacred medicines to be treated with respect, and they can help the community psychologically. So looking at the toxicity scales of different drugs, psilocybin is unique, and that is one of the most extraordinarily non-toxic medicines that the FDA has ever considered. So we are now seeing a revolution across the planet. Literally, as Nina and Kenny like to say, a revolution from the underground. Well, that's exactly what is happening. So many of you know that Oakland was the first to decriminalize psychoactive plants, and psilocybin in particular. It was followed by Denver, and most recently in Washington, D.C., in the belly of the beast. I think more than 70% of the voters voted for the decriminalization of psychedelics. And then most recently, of course, in Oregon, ballot measures 109 and 110 on the therapeutic use of psilocybin to be legalized, and the decriminalization of drugs, ballot 110. So this is the will of the people. And so politicians, government officials, take note. This is the will of the people. The people are voting to decriminalize these sacred substances so they can be responsibly used, for helping people in need. What is so extraordinary about these medicines is that their widespread effects address many issues currently that are not being addressed by conventional medicines, especially with PTSD, with trauma associated with other challenges that we face in life, with addiction, with opioids, with tobacco. A more recent study from Johns Hopkins showing that a heroic dose of psilocybin combined with therapy shows up to a greater than 60% reduction, not only in the tobacco use, but in the 2-year window subsequently, people were able to break their tobacco addiction, one of the most addictive substances that we're aware of. And so I want to just, emphasize the importance that, the tides are changing. We have come to a point now to recognize that psilocybin and psilocybin mushrooms are appropriate medicines for our time. We all suffer from some form of trauma right now because of COVID. We are stressed, many of us, to our limits. We've never had these challenges like this before. Many indigenous peoples have suffered from much greater challenges than that which most of us are suffering from now. So this is unfortunately, the road has been unfortunately paved by the trauma of many people before we've seen COVID. But we are all on this earthship together. So it's important that we act in unity and with compassion. One of the things that's so interesting about psilocybin mushrooms is that from the experience of psilocybin mushrooms, there's an enormous reduction in depression and anxiety. We have actually launched an app at microdose.me. It's for the Apple platform. It's anonymized. It's gone through board review to make sure that it conforms to health professional standards. And we have had over 14,000 subscribers to microdose.me. It measures mood, anxiety, depression, agility. There's a TAP test that's important for determining if someone has pre-Parkinson-like symptoms, the ability of you being able to tap your fingers as quickly as possible in 60 seconds. It's got hearing, it's got sight, it's got memory. And we have now just uncovered some of the data sets. And the data sets from microdosing with psilocybin mushrooms are revealing profound results. Although many of these institutions, in fact, all of them that I know of, have been using pure psilocybin or psilocin. Psilocybin dephosphorylates into psilocin. So when you take psilocybin, either in pure substance or in a mushroom, it becomes psilocin, and that crosses into the blood-brain barrier. is a 5-HT2A agonist, which means it substitutes for serotonin, your most predominant neurotransmitter. So in looking at the clinical studies using pure psilocybin or psilocin, it clearly shows tremendously positive effects in offsetting depression with long-term positive results. What's interesting about some of the Johns Hopkins studies with PTSD is that with the psilocybin experience, an intensive one, with therapy, with follow-up therapeutic consultations, many of these patients have resolved their PTSD trauma. And what's so interesting about it is remembering the curative session with psilocybin appears to supplant the PTSD experience. And so the very act of remembering it has a therapeutic benefit. Now, this is really interesting because it suggests that there is a different chain of neurons, neurological sequences that become then resonant. And this becomes the predominant reflection upon your life. You remember how wonderful it was to have that resolution of your trauma through a high dose guided psilocybin trip. Now, this also brings into focus some other issues that I want to bring up. Is that are psilocybin mushrooms less, equal, or more beneficial than psilocybin in pure form? There is a rush right now to commercialize psilocybin. At least 20 companies have been created for the commercialization of psilocybin into a pharmaceutical drug. And though I do applaud everyone's effort to be able to use psilocybin to resolve many of the issues I just described, I am also very, very concerned about the commercialization of a sacred substance. With the Microdose.me app, it was not with pure psilocybin, it was with psilocybin mushrooms. And our results thus far using the DASS scale, which is a depression and anxiety index, the standard practice by psychiatrists, and the PANAS scale, which is another scale that measures mood and positive mood and negative mood. With both these scales using microdosing, and microdosing is defined as taking a sub-sensorium dose of psilocybin. That means below a threshold that you would experience it. So if you take some psilocybin mushrooms and you feel them, that's not a microdose. So a microdose with psilocybe cubensis is around 1/10 of a gram. I have liftoff for myself. I'm pretty experienced in this, but I have liftoff around 1/3 to 1/2 of a gram. There is normalization over time. So if you take a dose of psilocybin, even if you have a liftoff dose later on, you normalize. But the subsensorium microdose translates into about 1/10 of a gram of psilocybe cubensis, the most commonly available psilocybin mushroom currently. And with those microdoses, which is done periodically through the week, and in our Microdose.me app, there's 3 confounders to our data that I want to underscore. Number one, you have variability in the potency of the psilocybin mushrooms you're obtaining. Are they a year old? How were they grown? How were they stored? Et cetera, et cetera. Then you also have the variability in the receptivity of the individuals that are taking the psilocybin mushrooms. Some people are non-responders. This is hugely important. And then the third, which I just sort of alluded to, was the frequency of how often you're taking them. Are you taking them once a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week? Despite those 3 confounders, when we unveiled the data, we found that the p-values of significance, and many of you know what this is, but for those that you don't, a p-value is a statistical measurement of predicted significance. And if a p-value is 0.05, you have 95% confidence. Our p-values are 0.00001, unambiguously significant. So the fact that psilocybin mushrooms are giving such positive results that are competitive or comparative, depending on your point of view, the pure psilocybin being promoted by these new pharmaceutical startup companies, I think is an example of people medicine versus profit medicine. Now, I would like to take both sides of the fence here in this argument. What is people medicine? Well, people medicine is psilocybin mushrooms are available for the people. People can grow them at home. You can grow them in your backyard. There's lots of opportunities for acquiring them without having a physician permission or prescription. So the problem with psilocybin mushrooms, as I mentioned, is the variability. The problem also is the fact that you don't know the chain of custody where it came from. If you have an adverse reaction, who do you talk to? And then the standardization not being certain means that the variability can be substantial from one experience to another. So there's obviously quality control problems. And another one that's a big issue with me is taxes. The underground psilocybin mushroom economy is not paying their fair of taxes. They use the roads, they use the fire department, the police department, all the social benefits from the post office, etc., and they are basically doing commercial transactions tax-free. Okay, I think that can be solved through the decriminalization and the licensing of quality controlled psilocybin mushroom suppliers. That I think will be happening in Oregon first. So, but the other side of the coin, in defense or in favor of the pharmaceutical grade psilocybin, is the fact that you can get a standardized amount. You do know the chain of custody, where it came from. You do know where to go if you have an adverse reaction. And of course, it is taxable. There is a tax revenue going back for the sale of these substances. But nevertheless, I think the benefits of psilocybin mushrooms far outweigh the benefits of psilocybin. And that's specifically because of the entourage effect. For the past several years, we've been looking at the psilocybin analogs. Psilocybin mushrooms contain several other tryptamines that are metabolically in the chain of production of psilocybin or its degradation, baeocystin, norbaeocystin, and norpsilocin. We have found that baeocystin, norbaeocystin, norpsilocin, which are not psychoactive, they won't get you high, but they produce strong neurogenesis. And in the slides that you can see, we do experiments compared to controls, saline controls, brain-derived nerve growth factors, BDNFs, and then we spike these neurons from pluripotent stem cells growing in vitro with aliquots of baeocystin, norbaeocystin, and norpsilocin. All those compounds are legal. And we found something extraordinary. Not only did it stimulate neurons to grow within 7 to 12 days, but when we started stacking them, and especially with lion's mane, we had greater than the arithmetic predicted effect. And what that means is when some of these neurons increase by 8% or 12% with another sample, the additive effect would be 20%, you would think. No, we got 36% increase. So the entourage effect of these naturally occurring psilocybin analogs, and we have found stacking it with lion's mane, mushroom mycelium based products, then creates an entourage effect of neurogenesis. This is so important because I think psilocybin is an Einstein molecule. Psilocybin makes you smarter. Psilocybin makes you kinder. Psilocybin makes you more courageous. And in the slide decks that you'll see, there's several meta-studies that are extraordinary. A single dose of psilocybin is closely correlated with a reduction to partner violence, reducing larceny by more than 20%, violent crime by 18%. Now, association is not causation, but it can be. And the more these studies progress, it looks like psilocybin mushrooms do make for better citizens, better people. When someone is traumatized, it not only traumatizes themselves and the victim, but it traumatizes their families of both. And not only their families, but their neighbors and their communities and their cities and their countries. So this is a worldwide uprising, I think, when people realize that psilocybin mushrooms can resolve trauma. And so I hope all of you come to understand that these need to be used responsibly. It's very important that we don't lose this opportunity. In the 1960s, it was lost. We have to treat these substances as sacred medicines. We have a panel later on today. We'll talk about the indigenous use of these sacraments and how do psilocybin mushrooms fit into that context with the indigenous history of the use of these sacred substances. So with that, because time is so short, I want to say thank you very much, Kenny and Nina. I'm just speaking into a box here. So thank you so much for everything you've done for the community. Thank you for giving me this voice. And I hope all of us survive this shared crisis together, and we come out as a better people, a kinder people, and more courageous, and with greater wisdom. Thank you.